Okay, so, everybody's talking about AI these days, but we're going to really try to dig in and get to the bottom of it. Like, what is this stuff and what does it mean, for our safety? We've been going through all this research and I'm hoping we can use this time to like really unpack this whole thing. Like, how did we get here? Where are we going? And what are the big questions we need to be thinking about? It's a lot. So,
It is, but it's super important, right? I mean, it's changing everything so fast.
completely.
So I think a good place to start is just to make sure we're clear on what we're actually talking about when we say AI, because it's used for so many things.
Right, you see it everywhere now.
Right, exactly. Like even just unlocking our phones.
So what is artificial intelligence? What's the core concept here?
Yeah, at its simplest, you can think of it as building systems that can do things that normally require human intelligence.
Yeah.
So things like recognizing patterns, making decisions based on information, solving problems, and even learning from new experiences.
Okay, so like thinking like a human, but like in a computer.
Yeah, exactly. Now, not all AI is the same, though, right? Our sources talk about different kinds of AI. There's this thing called narrow AI, which is sometimes called weak AI, and it's basically designed to do one specific task, but to do it really, really well.
Okay, so like a specialist.
Exactly, a specialist. And we see this everywhere, like facial recognition software, like they use that in airports, right? Or virtual assistants, like Siri or Alexa that answer your questions. And even like the algorithms that recommend what movies you might like on Netflix.
Yeah, they're pretty good at that, I gotta say.
Yeah, right. Those are all examples of narrow AI. It's like it's intelligent, but in this very specific domain.
Okay, that makes sense. So super smart, but in a limited way.
Yeah, exactly. Now, there's also this idea of general AI or strong AI, and that's more like what you were saying before, building a machine that can do any intellectual task that a human can.
Like a truly thinking machine.
Yeah, right. And, that's still largely theoretical. Researchers are working on it, but it would be a huge leap to get there.
Mm,
It's not something we've achieved yet.
gotcha. But, sci-fi loves to speculate about that.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Which reminds me, our sources talk about something called AI superintelligence, and that sounds a little, ominous.
Yeah, superintelligence takes it even a step further, right? It's this idea of an AI that wouldn't just be as smart as humans, but would actually surpass us in almost every way.
Like way smarter.
Way smarter.
Hmm.
And that raises some really interesting questions. I mean, what happens if we create something that's far more intelligent than we are?
Hmm.
Can we even control it? I mean, some really smart people have been thinking about this, like, what are the potential risks if its goals don't align with ours?
Yeah, that's getting into like existential stuff.
Right. I mean, it's definitely something to think about.
It is, it is. So, okay, we've got these different kinds of AI, but one of our sources talks about a really basic definition, like what it is at its heart. It's from John McCarthy, who's like a pioneer in the field. What did he say?
Yeah, John McCarthy, he was there at the very beginning, and he defined AI as, and I'm quoting here, the science and engineering of making intelligent machines, especially intelligent computer programs.
Okay, so it's about actually building these things.
Exactly. He said that back in the 1950s, and it still holds true today, AI isn't just, an idea, it's about actually creating these systems.
Yeah, and our sources really focus on why AI is becoming so important, especially when it comes to public safety.
Absolutely. It's changing the game in so many ways. I mean, think about the amount of data we generate today, right?
Hmm.
It's massive. And one of the things that AI is really good at is analyzing huge amounts of information very, very quickly. And that's why it's becoming so crucial for things like, responding to threats, preventing crime, keeping people safe.
Right, because you need to be able to make sense of all that data quickly to actually, do something with it.
Exactly. It's like if you're trying to find a needle in a haystack, AI can help you do that much, much faster than you could on your own. And in public safety, that speed can be really critical.
So yeah, it's all about speed and efficiency.
And, getting ahead of the curve, which is like the whole point of prevention.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so we've got a sense of what AI is and why it's important, but how did we even get here? It's not like we just woke up one day and had self-driving cars. There must be a whole history behind this.
Oh, absolutely. The idea of machines that could think, or act intelligently, it actually goes back centuries. I mean, our sources even mention like ancient myths and stories, like the Greek myth of Telos.
Talos, okay, who was that?
Yeah, Telos was this giant bronze statue that was supposed to protect the island of Crete. It's like this really early concept of, an artificial being created for a specific purpose.
Like a security guard, but, bronze.
Right. But the real, like, modern field of AI, it really emerged with the development of computers in the last century.
Okay, so let's jump ahead to the 20th century then. What are some of the big moments, like the key milestones in the development of AI?
Okay, so the period from the 1950s through the 1970s, that was really like the birth of AI as we know it.
Yeah.
One of the big early things was this test that Alan Turing came up with in 1950. It's called the Turing test. And the idea is, can you tell if you're talking to a machine or a human being?
Oh, I've heard of that. Like if you're chatting online and you can't tell if it's a person or a computer.
Exactly. And that idea is still really important today. It gets at the heart of, like, what does it mean for a machine to be intelligent?
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept.
And then just a few years later, in 1956, there was this conference at Dartmouth College. It's actually where the term artificial intelligence was first used, like officially coined.
Okay, so that's where it all began.
It is. It is. It's considered the official start of AI as a field of research. And during this period, there was also a lot of work on building what they called expert systems. These were computer programs designed to, like, mimic how a human expert would make decisions in a specific field.
So trying to capture human expertise in a computer program, that's pretty ambitious.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of excitement about AI at this time, a lot of optimism about what it could do.
Right, it seemed like anything was possible.
Yeah, but then things kind of, slowed down a bit. One of our sources talks about this period as the AI winter.
The AI winter? That doesn't sound too good.
Yeah, it wasn't the best time for AI. You see, those early high hopes, they led to some, pretty big promises about what AI could achieve. And when those promises weren't met, the funding dried up and people started to get skeptical.
So, a bit of a reality check.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, computers back then just weren't as powerful as they are today, and AI projects were really expensive. So kind of made sense that things slowed down for a while.
But the research continued, right? I mean, it didn't just completely stop.
Oh, it definitely continued. And in the 1980s, there was a bit of a resurgence of interest as they started making more progress with those expert systems I mentioned, using them for practical things like in medicine and engineering.
Okay, so it found its footing again. And our sources talk about how things really started to pick up again in the 1990s with this thing called machine learning.
Yeah, machine learning was a game changer. It's all about using algorithms that can learn from data, right? So instead of having to program the computer for every single possibility, you give it a bunch of data and it can figure out the patterns and make predictions on its own.
Okay, so the computer is learning from experience, kind of like how humans do.
Right, exactly. And this was made possible by, computers getting much more powerful and being able to handle these huge data sets. And there was this really big event in 1997 that really captured people's attention. IBM built this computer called Deep Blue, and it beat Garry Kasparov, who was the world champion chess player at the time.
Wow, I remember that. It was a huge deal. It felt like, okay, machines really are getting smart.
It was a big moment, and it really showed the potential of these new machine learning techniques. And that brings us to where we are today, which is like the era of applied AI. We're seeing AI being used for all sorts of things in the real world.
Right, like it's everywhere now. And one of the big things driving this is something called deep neural networks, right?
Exactly. Deep neural networks are these incredibly complex algorithms that are inspired by the structure of the human brain.
Wow, so they're trying to mimic how our brains work.
Yeah, and they're proving to be incredibly powerful. I mean, they're driving a lot of the breakthroughs we're seeing in AI today, like facial recognition, machine translation, those online translators that are actually getting pretty good now, and even self-driving cars.
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly that technology is advancing.
Right. And importantly for what we're talking about today, deep neural networks are being used in a lot of security applications. Like there are systems now that can monitor for threats in real time and even try to predict where crime might happen.
It's like they're taking all the data from the past and using it to, like, see into the future.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And we're seeing the widespread use of things like chatbots and virtual assistants that are powered by AI.
Right, so it's moving beyond just the research lab and into our everyday lives.
Exactly.
Okay, so, we've talked about what AI is, how it's evolved. Let's really get into the specifics of how it's being used in public safety right now.
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, it's having a huge impact already.
Our sources outline a bunch of, like, key applications. One of the first ones they talk about is this thing called predictive analytics. Can you explain that a little?
Yeah, so predictive analytics, basically it involves using AI to analyze data about past crimes. like where they happened, when they happened, what kind of crimes they were. And by finding patterns in all that data, the AI can make predictions about where future crimes might be more likely to occur.
So it's like looking for hot spots where crime might happen.
Exactly. And that allows law enforcement agencies to, be more strategic about how they use their resources. Like if they know that a certain area is more likely to have, property crimes, they can focus their patrols there.
That makes sense. So instead of just reacting to crime, they can try to prevent it from happening in the first place.
Right. And there are cities all over the world that are starting to use these kinds of systems. Los Angeles is a big one. And London's been using them for a while, too.
That's interesting. It's really changing how we approach law enforcement.
Yeah, it's definitely a shift.
Okay, another application that's becoming really common is facial recognition and biometrics. I mean, we see it everywhere now.
Yeah, it is.
At airports, even on our phones. But how is it being used in public safety?
So AI-powered facial recognition is being used in a lot of different ways. Like you said, airports are using it to help identify people who might be on watch lists or something like that. And other public spaces are starting to use it too. They have cameras that can scan faces and compare them to databases of, wanted criminals or missing persons.
So it can match a face to a name in a database.
Right. And the big advantage is speed. Right. It can happen in real time, which can be really critical if you're trying to catch someone or find a missing person quickly.
So it could help solve crimes faster or, reunite families.
Exactly. And then there's also, the whole security aspect of it, like controlling access to buildings or secure areas. You see that a lot now, too.
Yeah, like using your face as your ID card.
Exactly.
Pretty wild. Okay, so, we've all seen security cameras like everywhere we go, but I imagine AI is changing how those work too, right?
Oh, yeah, big time. It's not just about recording video anymore. Like now we have what's called intelligent surveillance. So these are cameras that are powered by AI, and they can do things like, detect unusual movements or activities, like if someone's loitering in an area they shouldn't be, or if there's a sudden crowd surge or something like that.
So it's like the camera is actually paying attention.
Yeah, exactly. And they can also automatically read license plates, which is really useful for, tracking stolen vehicles or things like that. And some systems can even analyze patterns of behavior, like is someone acting suspiciously?
Wow, so it's like having a super observant security guard that never gets tired.
Right. And it can make a huge difference in how quickly they can respond to emergencies, Like if the AI sees something that looks like a problem, it can immediately alert the authorities.
So it's making our cities safer and more efficient.
Yeah, and it's also reducing the workload on human security personnel who used to have to sit there and watch hours and hours of footage.
Yeah, nobody wants to do that. Okay, so we've talked about predictive policing, facial recognition, intelligent surveillance. There's one more key application our sources highlight, which is cybersecurity. And this is something that affects all of us.
Yeah, totally. Cybersecurity is a huge issue, and AI is actually becoming one of our best tools for fighting cyber attacks.
Okay, so how's it working?
So these AI algorithms can analyze tons of data, like network traffic, looking for patterns that might indicate that a cyber attack is happening, like right now as it's happening. And they can do it way faster than any human could.
So it's like an early warning system.
Yeah, exactly. It allows them to detect and stop these attacks in real time, which is essential if you're trying to protect, critical infrastructure like power grids or sensitive data like financial information.
Right. So it's not just about catching the bad guys after they've done something. It's about stopping them before they can even get in.
Right. And there are even examples of AI being used to detect things like credit card fraud. So it's being used in a lot of different ways to protect us online.
Wow, AI really is everywhere. So we've gone through, all these different ways AI is being used to keep us safe. But I think it's really important to also talk about, the bigger picture, the implications of using this technology. Our sources talk about some of these considerations.
Absolutely. I mean, AI is powerful, and we have to use it carefully.
So let's start with facial recognition, since it seems like that's one that's raising a lot of concerns.
Right. And it's understandable. It's a technology that can be used for good, like we talked about, helping to solve crimes and find missing people.
Right.
But there are definitely concerns about how it's being used.
Yeah.
Right. Like, first of all, you have to make sure that these systems are accurate. You don't want innocent people being misidentified.
Yeah, imagine being, flagged as a criminal when you've done nothing wrong. That's terrifying.
Exactly. And then there's a whole question of, like, where is this technology being used and who has access to the data? Are there proper safeguards in place to prevent misuse?
So it's about balancing the benefits with the potential risks. Okay, so that's facial recognition. What about predictive policing? We talked about how it can help allocate resources more effectively, but are there other things we need to consider?
Yeah, the big thing with predictive policing is that it's only as good as the data it's trained on, right?
Oh.
So if the historical data reflects, biases or inequalities in how the law has been enforced in the past, then the AI system might end up perpetuating those biases.
So it could end up unfairly targeting certain communities.
Exactly. It's really important to make sure these systems are trained on fair and unbiased data. And even then, to keep an eye on how they're being used to make sure they're not having unintended consequences.
Right, because the last thing we want is for AI to reinforce existing problems. Okay, so we've talked about facial recognition, predictive policing. Now let's get into intelligent surveillance, those AI-powered cameras that can detect suspicious activity.
Okay.
It sounds like a good idea in theory, but what are some of the things we should be thinking about when it comes to using this kind of technology?
Yeah, so the big thing with surveillance, obviously, is privacy, right? I mean, how much monitoring is too much? Where do we draw the line? And then there's the question of, who has access to the data that these cameras are collecting, and how is it being used?
So it's about making sure it's not being used for things that it wasn't intended for.
Exactly. And that there's transparency and accountability. People should know when they're being monitored, and there should be clear rules about how that data can be used.
Right, it shouldn't be a secret. We should all be able to understand how it's being used. Okay, and lastly, cybersecurity. It might feel a little different from physical surveillance, but are there still things we should be thinking about when it comes to AI and cybersecurity?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, even though it's happening in the digital world, there's still ethical considerations. Like, you want to make sure these AI systems are constantly being updated and refined because, cyber attacks are getting more sophisticated all the time.
So it's like an arms race, basically.
Yeah, kind of. And it's also really important to make sure that the AI systems themselves are secure. Like, what if someone hacks into the system that's supposed to be protecting us from hackers?
Yeah, that would be a disaster. So even though we're talking about technology, it's really about people, right? Like
Yeah.
people are building these systems, people are using them, and people are being affected by them.
Absolutely. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind as we move forward with AI.
So we've talked about some of the specific concerns, but our sources also talk about like the bigger picture, the historical and ethical frameworks for thinking about AI. It's not like these questions are totally new, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
A lot of these ideas have been around for centuries.
Right.
Like, we've always been concerned with making sure that technology is used for good and that it doesn't harm people. Those are like fundamental ethical principles.
Right. And those same principles apply to AI, even though it's a new technology.
Exactly. We have to be mindful of the potential consequences and make sure we're using it in a way that aligns with our values.
So, thinking about AI ethics specifically, what are some of the key ideas that people are talking about?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different frameworks out there, but some of the core principles are things like, beneficence, which means making sure that AI benefits society as a whole. Non-maleficence, which means making sure it doesn't cause harm. Autonomy, which means respecting people's choices and their privacy. And justice, which means making sure that AI is used fairly and doesn't create or exacerbate inequalities.
Okay, so it's not just about like the technical stuff, it's about making sure that AI is used ethically.
Right. And that it's aligned with our values as a society.
Absolutely. So, thinking about everything we've discussed, what are some of the like key takeaways about the responsible use of AI in public safety?
Yeah, I think some of the really important things are, making sure these systems are accurate and reliable, like we talked about. That means doing rigorous testing and evaluation.
Right, making sure they actually work.
Right. And then there needs to be clear rules and regulations in place about how they can be used. We can't just let this technology develop without any oversight.
So, we need laws to keep up with the technology.
Exactly. And, one of the big things is making sure there's always human oversight.
Yeah.
We shouldn't just blindly trust these systems. There should always be a human in the loop, making sure they're being used appropriately and ethically.
So, it's not about replacing humans, it's about like augmenting our capabilities.
Right, exactly. And I think another really important thing is education. Both for the people who are developing and using these systems, but also for the public. We need to understand how this technology works and what the implications are so that we can have an informed discussion about how we want to use it.
That's a great point. So, we've covered a lot of ground today, and, clearly this is a conversation that's going to continue.
It is. It is. It's a really important one.
It is. So, for all of you listening, here's a thought to leave you with. AI is becoming increasingly integrated into our lives, and, especially when it comes to safety and security. So, the question is, how can we make sure we're using it in a way that benefits our communities while also being mindful of, the ethical considerations and individual rights? We need to find that balance between innovation and responsibility.